Hello and welcome to another episode of Mark My Words, the podcast series where I interview some interesting guests to give you insight that's relevant to businesses and charities. And today I'm really pleased to be joined by Chris from Cocreate. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Nice to see you. So Chris, can you tell us who you are and what you do, please?
I can. So my name is Chris Hewitt, and I run a small-ish enterprise. We're a commercial enterprise with a kind of social purpose called Cocreate.
Excellent. And tell us what Cocreate does, if that's okay.
Of course. Cocreate was set up originally with Department of Health funding. As I say, we're now an independent entity, although owned by a housing association, which is slightly complicated. But our practice is all about helping people to effectively work more collaboratively. We talk about people-centered change. And we practice, or we certainly apply, some of the principles of an approach called Coproduction, which has got a lot of traction in health and the voluntary sector. And we're interested particularly in helping make collaborative approaches like co-production feel a bit more accessible and attainable, especially if you're working in a big organization where it can be quite hard to make change happen in a way that really involves people.
Okay, thank you. So what is actually co-production and co-design? And I suppose more importantly, what are the benefits of it?
Well, the benefits are, when you start thinking about it, quite self-explanatory, because the fundamental idea is that if you're going to make a change to a service, a product, a place, that you should involve the people who are going to be affected by that change in the process of making it. And why co-production is kind of necessary, I suppose, as a concept, as a set of methods, and as a mindset, is because when you start trying to involve people in making those changes, you quite quickly realize it's not as straightforward as just asking people what they think, because there's power structures that are there. There's often a history of different relationships. There's people's basic relationships with large organizations. There's feelings of belonging or importance or worth or interest and enthusiasm, confidence in themselves. All of these things that you kind of have to tackle if you want to get on a level footing with people and involve them in making change together. And again, that's a kind of fundamental, a real underlying thing throughout co-production, is recognizing power imbalance and addressing it, doing something to change it in that relationship while you're making change together.
Brilliant, thank you. So kind of involving people that are going to be affected by a service or something sounds, like a no-brainer, but you've just outlined all the different ways it can be challenging and the things that can stop people from doing it, I suppose. So if you were trying to encourage an organization to adopt co-production or co-design, then what tips would you give them to try and encourage those processes?
Well, I think it's probably starting small. If you read up on co-production, there's a lot, and particularly if you look on social media, people tweeting about it, a lot of people use the term slightly glibly, and then a lot of other people shoot them down for it. So a lot of discussion is about that isn't co-production, that isn't co-production. And sort of rightly so to an extent, because it's a term that means a lot to a lot of people. And if you feel like, it's transformed your life and your experience of using services, and particularly the way it preserves people's well-being and their power and stuff throughout process, you don't want to see it being thrown around unnecessarily. But I would say there's a lot of stuff you can be doing straight away that is working towards kind of full-blown co-production. And it's mostly about the kind of mindset, and it's like a muscle that you can develop through practice. So curiosity is a big part of it. And it's trying to kind of think outside of the lines that we tend to go down, particularly when we're working in our job role, and challenging some of those assumptions, particularly if they're assumptions that you're making about what someone else thinks or wants or is likely to do or be motivated by. And rather than just taking your own kind of word for it, asking people. So that's a really good place to start, is trying to have more curious kind of conversations where you don't know what's going to come out of it. And I think so with that is a bit of humility, but there's a bit of freedom that comes with that as well, because I think you have to kind of admit that you probably don't know everything. But then there's a kind of freedom in that, because you shouldn't know everything and you shouldn't feel like you ought to know everything. So you can kind of share the problems, the challenges you're facing with people a lot more easily. And the other thing is just to look really, so curiosity about other people and what's important to them, but it's kind of genuine curiosity about what you're already doing and how that might be making people feel, or how people might experience interactions with you. I've just written a short piece just about how we are perceived by people. If we're representing an organization, it's easy to feel that we're powerless, because you kind of think about how much agency you have over the different circumstances of your job, what happens each day, the types of tasks you can do, where you can do them, how long you can do them for, those sorts of things. And it's easy to feel powerless. And then you talk to someone outside your organization, someone who your organization serves, and you maybe think you're kind of on a level footing there with them. There's another person, there's lots of forces in their life that they can't control, same for you. But you're probably representing to them the whole organization when you're speaking to them. And it's easy to forget that. And there's something really important about that. It's thinking when we're talking to the public, to people who access our services or the people we serve in general, we're probably being seen to represent, hold all the power of the whole organization. So you kind of need to tread a bit carefully.
Really good points. Yeah, it was when you're talking, it made me think about from an individual point of view, that kind of imposter syndrome as well. So it's almost like how you think that if you're talking to somebody senior in a different organization, like a senior manager in the NHS or CCG or clinical mission group or whatever, it's like, oh my goodness, these are really, important people, and I'm just this. But yeah, it's an interesting point seeing it from the other side as well. So if you're talking to the public about what that means if you're representing an organization.
Well, just to build on something you said there as well, Mark, because I think for me, that view, it is easy to feel like that when we talk to kind of senior-ish people in other big bureaucratic organizations. But I think, so one of the things that characterizes our approach in Co-Create is a kind of trying to humanize everyone in that and help everyone step outside of their roles. And I think it's as harmful often to view other leaders as being kind of above us as it might be to view people who are outside of our service or outside of our organization as different or other. And I think if we characterize decision makers as being kind of power holders and acting in ways that are on behalf of the organization more than as an individual, we can kind of dehumanize them. And I think a lot of where Co-Create has the most effect is when we are demonstrating that empathy and compassion towards everyone. And it's about facilitating an open conversation between everyone, regardless of how much power you hold. So you kind of have to help everyone to work through the emotional barriers, which are very different for someone at the top of an organization to someone at the bottom or on the outside, but they are there still. And if you want change to happen, I kind of think you need to allow space for everyone to push through some stuff.
And you said that Co-Create's relatively new, been going for a few years after a kind of pilot phase, I suppose, or a funded phase. So, and I know you've recently done some work around defining the approach of Co-Create, what your ethos is, what the essence, what the values are, that kind of stuff, and what your working principles are, or I think what you call them building blocks. So can you tell us how you came up with that, and what are they, and why they're important, if that's okay?
I can. What I definitely can't tell you is what they all are. They're on our website, and there's 9 of them, which is arguably too many to remember. Well, it's definitely too many to remember. But the sort of thinking from where I approached it was, we've been going for just over 2.5 years now as an enterprise. We were funded by the Department of Health for 3 years before that, but really our identity was quite different then, and our working model was different. And I'm the only person who remains from that era. So it's been completely reinvented in the last sort of 2.5 years. But yeah, so it was around springtime, I think, when we started to look at, sort of realized we really needed to do this exercise in articulating what is it that we do, how do we do it, and how is that different from what other people are doing, or the other things we could be doing. And it came out of necessity because so I took on our first member of staff, events person besides me. Up till then, it had all been freelance associates who were delivering projects with us. And it was through trying to share share the workload, share things like the pool of associates, the types of projects we're taking on, the project setup process, started to realize it's very hard to talk about, is this associate ready for doing this? Are they capable of doing this? If we couldn't clearly articulate what is it that we do and don't do, if that makes sense. And someone recommended an article which about Draw the Owl. Twilio, I think, is the organization, probably mispronounced. But really an interesting set of ideas, and really aspects of it really resonated with me about that. Firstly, that it's okay to not define your kind of values and ways of working for the first couple of years, and actually probably better. So that alleviated a bit of anxiety straight away, that this wasn't something that I should already know and actually have to be out there working, doing stuff. It's not about setting them and then doing them. It's actually about doing them and then identifying what they are. So we did an exercise where we asked, so at the time we had maybe 10 or 12 freelance associates doing bits or pieces of different projects, and asked them all, what does it feel like when you're doing a co-create thing, and how is it different from other things you do and you're involved in? And quite an open way. And I think we had some calls with people where they gave their input, which Mark, you helped with, didn't you? And so took some calls from people. Some of it people preferred to do it written, and we had a couple of prompts, a few different questions to ask them. But really what we wanted was a volume of just thoughts and feelings. We then put that into, we use Miro a lot, which is a digital whiteboard platform. We use it for a lot of things. And we used it in this case for doing some kind of thematic analysis. So there's probably over 100 individual ideas that came back, and we started to group them and theme them and look at, right, what are the common things we're starting to see form here? There's another important bit, I think, from the Twilio article that struck me, which was they have 9. I mean, we wind up with, it's semi-coincidence that we wound up with 9, but also I suppose it felt like a safe number from what they'd done. I liked their ethos about it, which was, it's not there because you expect everyone to know all of these. You expect everyone to be kind of able and willing to adopt them when they're doing work for your organization, and that's how I look at them. So I don't expect everyone to arrive and they're like, oh yes, I already do all of these things all the time in all of my work. But I do expect to be able to have a conversation with someone and say, this one here, I've noticed you don't seem to be doing this one so much. Now, is that because you're kind of able to do it and you don't want to, or because you don't feel like you've got the skills and ability to do it? And so it's just a kind of starting point for conversations as much as anything. And I think the other thing is that, again, from the article, that a couple of them will resonate. Everyone will have a couple that stand out to them. And they're like, yes, that's absolutely for me. And then the rest of them, they'll kind of be happy to live with. And then that's fine. But for me, they make up the whole piece, and they're, for me, and I suppose because it's kind of my organization to an extent, or I set the vision anyway. They probably resonate with me more than with anyone else.
It's like a set of expectations, a set of principles, a set of way of being almost. That's not too jargony, yeah.
Yeah. I think we've called it how we work. Or we sometimes refer to as our values because it's a bit simpler to say. And the other thing is that it's a point in time, and it was true then, and they're probably still, broadly speaking, true. But we might look back at them in a few months and think we need to redo this, because it's not about setting this is how we are forever. And we're a growing organization, we are always shifting in how we do stuff and learning, and getting lots of things wrong.
So could you share like one or two, or like what stick out for you? And again, I'm not going to test you to remember all 9, but yeah, first. Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to bring up the website now because I've got them all there to remind me. But yeah, well, without looking at the website, the ones that really stuck out to me were, one was we care and we show it, and we're not afraid to. So, and it came back from at least one of the associates to say there's a real feeling, although we are in some ways a disparate team of freelancers, we try and demonstrate care for each other and for our clients and for participants in what we do. And I think that's part of, really, definitely one of the underpinning principles of Cocreate is, and it sits behind all the approaches we use as well. It's treating people as whole human beings. So rather than thinking, well, we're vulnerable humans, but when we step into the workplace, we need to be kind of bulletproof, resilient, these kind of machines. It's not like that. So you need to be able to hold safely and like openly hold all the stuff that makes you a human. So yeah, and demonstrating care is a big part of that. And I'd say we try and do that in the systems and processes we develop, as well as the way we interact with each other and the way we hold meetings, and the way we share problems and those sort of things. So that's a really important one for me. And another one is about, well, two that are really important to me. One is, and they're almost contradictory with one another, but one is about things kind of getting messy, and I was feeling okay with that. So there's a really core thing with co-production and related approaches, which is when you describe the process and the principles, you can do it very neatly and say, this happens here, this happens here, this happens there. And then you start doing it and you just feel like everything has fallen apart around you. And there's so many unknowns because you've invited so many people in, and the whole idea is you don't decide what the outcomes are at the start. You find them and develop them together along the way. So if you're used to, which most of us are, more traditional kind of workplace activities where the endpoint is set before you begin and you're just filling in the tasks, it can be pretty unsettling. And I think we all support each other to work with that kind of feeling of being in mess, but confident that it's going to end in something good. So that's a really key one for me. And then the other side of it, which is, as I say, you could view it being at odds with that a bit, is about just being really rigorous and professional about stuff. In co-production, the whole concept comes from a kind of grassroots place, and it's got a lot of traction in, as I say, kind of community spaces, and holds a lot of meaning and power for people at a kind of individual and community level. And I think, so there's a lot of stuff out there. There's loads of free resources, lots of great support for people who are working at community level and want to do stuff and make a difference, and get kind of mobile from a person perspective, if you like. I think there's less accessible stuff at an organizational level for starting to try and kind of dissolve the structures. And because it's all very well having lots of activated, enthusiastic and passionate people who want to be involved in change, but if organizations aren't capable of doing that, then we need to find a way to help meet in the middle. So that's where our work tends to be, with the kind of power holders in a co-productive situation. And to do that, one of the things that we do is super rigorous, and we try and present everything in a kind of professional, if you like, way. So most of us have got experience of working in big organizations, local authorities, in the NHS, other big kind of bureaucracies or corporate settings. And we're kind of prepared and able to show up in those places. And like you were saying earlier, Mark, to be confident talking to heads of stuff or senior CCG people, and not feel like we don't have to slip into the kind of formal way of conducting meetings. We can still be human and open and stuff, but we're confident and capable, and we present in a way that's like boardroom safe. I would say it's a bit of a fine line, I think. But it's definitely one of the criteria that I think, if you're going to be part of Cocreate, you need to be able to do.
No, I think you're right. And sometimes it's about that being a critical friend as well, but holding that, walking that fine line. And I know some of the co-production stuff I've done for you and with you before. Your earlier point, definitely, and I know we've talked about this before, it's like, get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, because you don't necessarily know what the outcome's going to be, but it's about holding the space, holding the process, giving people the opportunity to have their say, using tools to try and bring out their own wisdom, but in the same way that you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, which can be terrifying. And also, especially when you're, and I really feel for, I suppose I've got a couple of years of this under my belt, so it's less nerve-wracking for me, but I still get really anxious about it, that we've got a big project, substantial amounts of money have changed hands or will be changing hands. We've told people we're going to be able to do this thing, deliver this thing, and we've got no idea what it is yet. So it's pretty anxiety inducing for people, understandably. But but in my experience, you know, trust the process and you focus on what's in front of you and doing that to the best of your ability, and you will get to a place that you need to at the end.
Brilliant, thank you. So you mentioned a few times the kind of the associate model that you operate, and you know, I've done some associate work for you before as well. So how does that work? How does that associate model work, and what are the benefits, would you say?
Well, in its simplest, so it works very simply. It's brilliant. It's really, I would say, if you're trying to grow a business, particularly the sort of, so we're effectively a management consultancy. That's the closest kind of model you would compare us to. And what it's meant for us, so the way it works, so when I started the enterprise, which was 2.5 years ago, it was just me. That was it. So I would go out pitching to clients, I'd design a whole project, I'd facilitate everything, to facilitate workshops, write it up, write a report, a whole lot. Quite early on, you know, the plan was always to work towards getting some associates in to help. And quite early on, I managed to recruit quite a few associates, including you, Mark. And so the way it used to work would be that I knew all of our, I mean, I still do. I know all of our associates. I know what their kind of strengths are and their experience. It was a very informal kind of recruitment process early on. We had one wave of recruitment with a big event, and then after that it was very informal. It was people I met through networking, really, who I would kind of recruit and add to the pile. And I will always have the first conversation with a client and have a chat to them about what they're interested in and what they're hoping to achieve, and we'll have a discussion about whether we could make a difference there. And then I would write the proposal. Yeah, so the saying, yeah, so I would do the initial proposal, set out the project plan, and then as and when required, bring in associates. And initially it would be me leading and then associates delivering elements of a project, maybe conducting some interviews, facilitating a workshop, co-facilitating with me. And as the volume of work grew, and I suppose my understanding of how we did stuff grew, so I could hand it over a bit easier, brought in more associates who could lead projects. And so in that case, it would be that I would talk to the client, I'd develop a plan, and then I would hand it over to the lead associate, and they would sort of oversee other associates working on the project. So all of our associates they're not employed, we just contract with them. There's an initial agreement that they sign just to kind of sign up to our ways of working and our principles and things. And so there's some stuff in there about confidentiality and a few other bits and pieces. So they're just the basics. And then once you've signed up to that, then we have an individual project agreement per project that we write up. And so we'll kind of contract separately for individual pieces of work. So one associate might have a number of kind of subsequent projects. They might have a couple that overlap a bit. Some projects, you know, we'll have some where it's just one workshop, so there'll be a bit of planning and then you run a workshop. Others will be a much longer piece of work, you know, multiple months working maybe a primary care network or a CCT. And the thing it's enabled us to do is to grow in a really low risk way, because for the first year and a half, almost 2 years, the only core cost was my salary, really, and a few overheads. And as work increased, we get more associates doing work, and as it decreased, if we had it. So when the pandemic first hit, you know, we really cut down for a couple of months, and there's probably 2 associates doing stuff while we developed some different ways to do things. But there was no risk, and we didn't have to think about kind of turning off the lights completely, because I hadn't taken on loads of staff to deliver the volume of work we had been doing. There's definitely some downsides as well, I would say, which is, so, you know, we want to have, for our clients, it's really important that they have a coherent kind of experience with us. And it's quite obvious why that would be more difficult when you're working with freelancers. And in my experience, so most of our associates have got at least one other kind of thing going on work-wise, whether it's a part-time job or their own consultancy practice. Some people have, you know, many different projects going on. So in my experience, what will tend to happen is we've got quite a few associates who are like that. They've got lots of other things, or they have limited time and they can do odd days here or there. So there's a challenge there. We're just trying to get people's availability when you're sort of getting ready to resource a project, there's a period of time when you're talking to the client and you don't yet know who's going to be available for it, and that can be a bit awkward and anxiety inducing. Am I going to have the people available at the right time? And there's also something about, so once, if by coincidence we happen to have a big project that needs a lot of capacity and that person happens to have a lull in their other work, then they'll take on that big project, and quite often we can then just keep them going with more and more similar size stuff, because it can sort of eclipse the other things for long enough that they can let some of their other sort of bits and pieces fall to the side a bit more, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
For some people, it'll always just be something they only want to do, a day a week or a day every few weeks, and that's fine. But ultimately, as we grow, I think we are going to need more staff, because there's something about that consistency and the time it takes to bring on board new associates. And while we do expect, there's a different expectation than with staff, in that we expect associates to be kind of fully formed and to have all the skills and the experience that they will need to do the tasks that are put to them. There's no kind of development on the role because we can't afford it. There's benefits to having staff, I think.
Okay. So you also mentioned about the impact of COVID. You mentioned on that briefly. So how else has that affected, not just like in the height of the pandemic and the lockdowns, but practice moving forward and sort of the hybrid stuff and the virtual stuff?
Yeah, it's had a huge impact. So our practice beforehand, before COVID, we were very kind of non-digital. We were purely analog, really, as an enterprise. And in terms of, we obviously used some digital stuff behind the scenes for record keeping and communication. But as far as the actual work that we did, it was all about getting people into a physical space together, and doing workshops with creative methods, using flip charts, sticky notes, those sort of things. And obviously when the pandemic hit, that was just completely off the cards. I remember I was facilitating a board meeting for a big voluntary sector organisation on the day when the lockdown came, and that was the last thing I did in person. And we were all a bit tense about, should we be here or not? And it was just, I think the lockdown was announced while we were there. So after that we had a month at least where we were just, it was myself and two associates who were doing more work at the time, and I was really unsure what to do, but I kind of had a feeling that the priority to get people involved in designing services and making change hadn't gone away and wasn't going to go away, but it looked like being able to get together in a physical space wasn't going to be around for a while. So rather than thinking, well, that's it, we better just pack up our bags for now and then maybe get them out again in 6 months, because at the time we didn't know how long it would last, did we? I just thought, well, maybe there are some ways we can do stuff remotely. So I sort of took a bit of a chance and paid a couple of associates to help me, and we developed some ways of doing stuff using Zoom, Miro, digital whiteboard platform, a few other things we tested out and then we got rid of. And I managed to get commissioned by NHS England to do a bit of work with them on remote co-production methods. And since then, we've gone from strength to strength. Pre-pandemic, the furthest afield we'd worked was Leicester. And now, we've got projects in Morecambe Bay. I've got associates in Scotland, Cornwall. We've got stuff all over the country. Right now, we've got active projects. We've got one in London, we've got two in Leicester, Liverpool, Morecambe Bay, Sheffield, all over the place. And I think some of the things that we've found, the efficiency of doing stuff remotely, I think I would be very keen to keep a hold of, even if everything does return to kind of normal.
Brilliant, thank you. And you also talked earlier about kind of your role and how it's developed from that initial, in the early days, kind of doing everything to now sort of being more taking more that strategic business development, that overseeing role. So how do you manage all those responsibilities and tasks, and also how do you look after yourself in all that as well?
Very good question. I'd say it's a work in progress, would be my answer, because I think the idea is definitely to try and spend as much time as I can looking at the strategic side of stuff, but the reality is and I don't know if this is always the case when you're growing. I think it may be, you can't get out of the operational side of stuff, because we're still trying to kind of really define exactly what we do and how we do it. And so there's always a bit of kind of, zooming in and out, I guess, from different perspectives. So from a work side, yeah, how do I keep myself well and manage the different things? Well, I've had to learn to be quite disciplined, I think. I've got my own personal, something that's made a big difference to me, things to do with just my own well-being, looking after myself a lot better than I was. I haven't drunk any alcohol for nearly a year now. That's made a big difference to my kind of energy levels throughout, not that I was drinking during the day, but just I would have a drink in the evening to relax sometimes, and then you're not quite as sharp the next morning, and I would notice the cost of that. I stopped drinking coffee a couple of months ago. I was a big coffee drinker. It's another thing that's made a difference. I've got a routine, sort of one of those sickening morning routines that I used to hear people talking about and think, how are you even doing that? So I tend to, my alarm goes off at about 6, and I meditate, I write in a journal, try and read a little bit, and a couple of mornings a week go for a run as well. And just those little things, they make a big difference to me. And then so it's kind of getting yourself feeling the best you can to then, because a lot of it is about ability to make little judgment calls about where you're going to spend your energy, I think. And for me, I notice if I'm too tired, I can't make those decisions as easily, and then I get dragged into things that then take my energy, and then I haven't got enough energy to do the things that are really important and I should have been doing first. But other than that, it's just trying to surround yourself with the best people, I think, is a big part of it, and stay in touch with them. Talk to people and be open and communicate and listen and be honest, and all of that stuff makes a huge difference. Because then there's a risk that if you don't do that, if you subscribe to an idea that you're supposed to be some kind of I don't know, hero or fixer or whatever you think you ought to be, it's easy to get yourself into the mindset of like, oh, I should be fixing this for everyone. Then it would be a lonely and unsustainable place. So I think it's being honest about the challenges and sharing with everyone and trying to work through them together. That makes the biggest difference, I think.
And so if you could go back 3, 4, 5 years or whatever to the start of the Cocreate journey, and knowing what you do now, what's the one big bit of advice you'd give yourself or tip that you know now that maybe you didn't know or didn't appreciate sort of in the early days?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, because my Cocreate journey, it's very hard to get a short answer out of me, Mark. I do apologise. My Cocreate journey started, I was a coordinator on the old project, Department of Health one. It was just really good timing getting on it, because I fell into it. I applied for a different job and didn't get it, and they offered me a chance at this one, and it sounded interesting, so I said yeah. But there was something resonated, and I don't think I would do anything different, because I kind of grabbed it with both hands and I stuck at it. And everyone else, when the funding was sort of ending, everyone else left one at a time, and they blinked first. But I just felt really sure there was something that resonated with me about Cocreate and the way it worked, and I thought I would really like a shot at running it if the enterprise does come up, and if we win, we put a business case in, and if they take it on, I thought I would really like to go at it. And I think I'd probably tell myself not to be so. I think it's confidence, but I don't think it's being confident about where you're setting where you're investing your money. I think is a big part of it. How you're spending your time and your money, and trying to focus on the long game, because all the time we've been trying to prove the model, really, and we still are. So there's always a pressure to try and generate surplus, because that's the proof that the business is working well. But really, I think maybe just having a bit more confidence, just to really invest in marketing and stuff early on. But then I think if we'd grown any faster, I don't know how I would have coped with it.
So something about almost like sticking to your guns. It almost sounds a bit like a gut feeling as well, to some extent.
Yeah, it's definitely something about that. I think trusting your gut, and maybe just a bit more. I think there have been times when I've probably pushed myself harder. So I think there's something about trying to make the business into something I think it ought to be, rather than letting it kind of be what it is, without wanting to sound too kind of philosophical about it. But I think it's easy to get into your head that, oh, we need to be bringing in X amount of income or doing it this certain way to prove that we are that thing. But if you're not that thing, you're not that thing. So you've kind of got to accept what you are and be the best you can at that, I think, which sounds incredibly trite, but
No,
it is true, because I don't see, so things like, you can do things that will influence the amount of work you'll get in the course of a year, but you can't control it. You know, your income will fluctuate. You can sell and market, and you can be strategic about it. You can measure what's going well, and you can do more of it and all of that stuff. But there's a certain amount of it that you will never be able to control. And I think being able to accept that and not take that as a personal failing or a sign of like you haven't got things right. Yeah, I think that's really important.
Brilliant, thank you. You got any questions or anything you want to ask me at all?
Yeah, what would you say? So from your perspective, what do you think Cocreate do well, and what could we do better at?
Well, that's a good question. I think, I mean, you've talked about the associate model. I think there's definitely strengths in that, in terms of being able to involve maybe a wider pool than you would have if you were, you know, employing one or two people. And then to some extent, I'd imagine, well, I know sometimes it's about then you've got a wider pool to sort of deploy certain people with certain skills or backgrounds or experience to certain projects. So I think, yeah, there's strengths in that, I suppose. And what could you do different? I mean, I think you know, the stuff that you're doing now in terms of the rebrand, refreshing the website, looking at social media, getting the messaging right, and expanding that, I think is really important. Because whilst to some extent your client group's quite niche or niched, actually, you know, when you cut away and think about what is the principles around co-production, co-design, you know, that can widen your customer pool as well. So I think you are actually doing it, and certainly from my experience of working with you and Cocreate, I'd agree with all the stuff that you've said in terms of that the royal you and you care, and that, you know, you always feel heard and create a safe space, an authentic space, in order to say challenging stuff if it needs to be a critical friend both ways, internally as well as externally. So yeah, I think those would be my thoughts.
That's helpful, thanks, Mark. Yeah, because I think, and if I was going to say one more thing, I suppose it's just feels really important to kind of own the fact that it's not a smooth ride. You know, it's not for any, but that's, and expecting it to be, or selling it as if it will be, is kind of a mistake, you know. And owning the fact, but actually what makes it work, it isn't the fact that we get everything right, it's that we are prepared to talk about how we can do it better, and we're kind of curious about that, and that we don't feel intimidated by that, and we're actually quite happy to have those conversations.
That whole test and learn approach, both with clients in the work, but also as an organization internally as well.
Yeah, completely.
Good. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time. Really interesting interview. Really enjoyed it. And keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks very much for having me.